Hi, it's Susan from Worldpeacefull. I'm going to read a poem called In Canberra, Corruption is Beyond Plato and Aristotle. What is corruption? Corruption, plethora, a rupture in the body politic, a standard deviation from the error of the estimate of minimum standards, where the ends justifies the means. The usher of the black rod stands at Westminster. A golden lion atop an ebony staff hails traditions, carbon dating from 1361, symbolising the power of office, the Queen's representative, a salient symbol of the Commons' independence from the monarch. The door slams in the face of the black rod bearer, blocking entry to the people's house. To urgently tap the rod 3 times, to open the House of Representatives, to summon the ministers. Pomp and ceremony opens access and maintains social order within the Lord's chambers, as this was a symbolic restraint on power of the people by the people, preventing the excesses of authoritarian rulers used against the commoners. The Senate became the house of review to check what balances, restraining totalitarianism justified by the laws of the landed gentry. For critical questions, Socratic dialogue, and contesting voices open inquiries rather than blind obedience in fear of death. To ensure the scales tip away from corruption of private interest to good governance in the public interest, as unjust laws must be defeated in the review to ensure the justice of the peace. This is the peace in justice. Corruption, the sleight of hand that appears legitimate, buries truth, slips offshore, renegotiates power behind closed doors, annexes star chambers when threatened, removes checks and balances scrolling down rights of review, restricted security access as turnkeys are keypads, fingerprints and swipe cards. Hidden chambers under the symbolic pyramid on Das Kapital Hill. A parliamentary triangle, not of mind, body and spirit, but executive, structural pyramid, defence, eagle eye, and City Hill, civilian. Power was to be or not to be in defence of civilians. Canberra means an Indigenous meeting place of the many tribes, symbolic of the burly Griffin. The Griffin symbolises divine power, the guardian of the divine, pulling the chariots of the Pharaoh, Apollo, Nemesis, and Alexander the Great. A shield of the knights, sacred to Apollo, a protector from evil and slander to ascend Christ. A vesicapiscis of intersecting circles, cross land and water access connecting sacred sites as such. The Pantheon with Mount Salamis to the west, the horns of the Mount Hymettos to the east of Athens, the axis urbis of Rome penetrates to the Alban hills. 6 ancient shrines are built on the north-south axis, stretching from Anzio through Lanuvio, Nemai and Tuscolo to Tivoli, with Monte Carew as the pinnacle, the sacred mountain. Akin, the Griffin's Bimberi Peak in Canberra, buildings sited to embrace protective mountain forms. The white tiger and the azure dragon, with a slow-moving body of water in the distance, Lake Bella Griffin. The geometry of the circle and the cross, Genesis and hermeneutic of the traditional cosmology, societies linked by mythical logic, to disseminate knowledge intent on reviving the paradigms of ancient cultures largely as a means of combating materialism and decadence, which they saw as endemic to modern society. A revivification of the Golden Age. Sacred and divine orders which belie Athens and Rome. Thus, the Caput Mundi. Democratic idealism fuses with organic naturalism into a public city. A city beautiful geometry is not a smart city's design, but a balancing of energies for harmony and peace. Symbols warning off corruption as a destruction of form and losing face. One can knock on the doors of Parliament, but there is no response or entry. No questions in time at question time, as compliance directives deviate from the letter of constitutional law. Law is firm in letters to threaten and bully one into moral submission for fear of rendition. For fear of a penalty to learn, speaking up to representatives can be illegal sedition. A petition can challenge government contract law as transgressing Pacific partnerships, excising the Commonwealth, debasing tax. To realise the government represents the people as contractees in their name without their knowledge. For who knows what is best as the public interest? Treason is trespassing on private property. The Roman law of treason tries for slander or defamation, penalising confiscation on property lists. Ruling classes are bred to rule, schooled in lineages of entitlement and privilege. Working class was born to work, fooled in lineages of enslavement to property as a right. The opera house culture, refinement and higher learning as love dies gallantly in a hero's demise. As the poor are the great unwashed and unsightly, they could be thieves in the night. Homelessness sleeps on the streets, reducing market values in prime real estate. Table conversation at estate suggests move on orders to remove this blight out of sight, rather than solving the great unrest where they have no time to sleep, perchance to dream. There is a silent scream as they are not heard, and no crumbs fall off the table. If they rise up, they are brutally repressed as fear rules, okay? And this is the dynamic that plays out for centuries. A never-ending story of haves and have-nots, of privilege and poverty, of inequality and deception that will reach a critical mass. As the masses become critical of corruption, as it comes to light in their name. I sit silently at peace near the spinning wheel. I hold the rod and contemplate the state of play that is no longer fun for many. For the law is not moral levies restraining the banks. The banks are not separated from deviant derivatives betting on collapse. Lawyers are not defending the honour of clients to ensure a fair hearing, for this is not a level playing field as the cards are stacked under the table. The dice are loaded to land on the right numbers in this Crown Royal Casino. As the royal flush is the ace, king, queen, jack, and number 10 of boys' clubs. It is playing for yields as investments live off rent, not perpetuity. Seeking to make ends meet by rightful means. Corruption results when the ends justify the means. Profit is entitlement, access. Virtues are enlightenment, wisdom. Wise philosophers ask many questions as they break the banks of inquiries just in time. So that's something to contemplate in respect of the very symbolism of Canberra itself. Walter and Marion Burley Griffin were theosophists, actually, and brilliant architects from Chicago. They were the ones that won the prize to design Canberra. The purpose of this design was to bring together in one site in the world all the sacred sites to one location. Not only is it a meeting place, it's a confluence where all roads lead to that center point. I was going to say Rome, but the word Centrepoint replaced it because I believe and sense that Rome really was about empire. And I've mentioned it before in a previous video because it came to me as that saying is all roads lead to Rome. For me, or I could even reframe it to all pathways lead to the center point. It's like a still point. So Canberra, this beautiful meeting place, this confluence, this center point, was really about bringing together the wisdom, that ancient wisdom, into the one place. The wisdom has not necessarily been understood as people come at truth conceptually through their own filters. When someone utters words of truth, others will seek to mimic that saying. Then they will repeat it, then they'll pass it on. But if they haven't arrived at truth from their own life experience, they will never be able to understand the true meaning as a lived, alive truth. They will be uttering concepts to create depth and meaning where depth and meaning do not exist. That's why, in a way, I could never teach another person truth, and I can never be taught truth by anyone else. I literally have to realize it. And this is where higher knowledge departs from learned knowledge through books. So what Walter and Marion tried to do was to create in the physical infrastructure of Canberra what I would call points of homeostasis, balancing points, where things balance one with the other. The use of the parliamentary triangle is not unlike the triangle enunciated by Abraham Lincoln, who was expressing equality in a structure through all sides being equal, and inherent within the design of that structure, for example, that triangle, there's a strength in that being in balance. Strength is the design of the balance. I was born here in Canberra. This is a place that has deep meaning for me. I feel the land very deeply. I spent a lot of time in the bush here. I feel this to be my city. Hence, I become that confluence. I become that center point. I embody that balance, which I call homeostasis, or the yin and the yang of it, where the dark and the light meet here. But the purpose of the design here is to balance it so that wise decisions come from various parties who come to this place. In conflict resolution, we talk about the process of going through step by step a process of solving problems, resolving conflict, where each party has the right to speak. To speak up is inherent within democracy. The conflict resolution process is democratic. The mediator is simply there to assist both parties to deeply listen to the other party. And that is where the Indigenous law influences outcomes, because this is Indigenous land here. So when one is able to speak at length in order to be heard, to hear themselves, to speak the truth as they see it from their own perspective, and for the other to learn to deeply listen to that one who's speaking, for that other to become still point, a center point, as they balance. They're not waiting to speak, they simply are listening to hear. There's no judgment in the mind, just a deep listening. When I was teaching concentric circles, both parties had to listen to one another and then repeat back what was said. Most people can't do it because they're not listening. This is the first departure from the homeostasis, or the balance, the meeting place. And this is where misunderstandings arise, when we're not really listening. It's often very hard for people to hear when it's not in their experience. That's why experiential learning is critical in order to resolve conflict. So going back to the scenario of conflict resolution, once that person has fully spoken what they needed to say without interruption, then the other party gets the opportunity to do the same. And the one who spoke goes silent, reclines into that center point, really deeply listening to hear. And then they get the opportunity, once that process is complete, to ask questions of one another. This is the real question time. Public needs to have an opportunity to ask questions of its parliamentarians directly. That should be allowed in question time. Q&A here in Australia is a primer for that, in the sense that people are learning how to ask questions of leaders. It's very important for the leaders to hear the questions, because they get caught up in groupthink amongst their peers, or they might have a lot of corporate people around them, and that becomes the dominant narrative because they can't hear the people. They become good at delivering public relations to appease people, but they lose the art of deep listening as representatives of that group, that larger group. So In that conflict resolution process, each party in turn asks questions of the other party, and then that party answers. The mediator may well ensure that no argument breaks out and just simply creates a safe space in which to communicate and for both to honour the process. Then once they've asked the questions of each other, then they move into a form of negotiation and look at the possibilities, the options of where they can meet in the middle. This is the meeting place. We meet in the middle. This means a certain degree of not only compromise, but through the sharing of knowledge, the blending of perspectives, which is when we start to move away from polarities of right and wrong, us and them, left and right, we move towards the centre where we become blended because we are starting to understand the other perspective. When you understand, you accept it and it becomes part of you. That is how we join. That is where unity is built. So we move towards that centre. In a really honest mediated session, we ensure that both parties are moving and in honour with their own truth. This actually takes us out of conflict resolution a little bit because I'm now bringing in a higher perspective, which is the centre point becomes the point where both agree in truth. They're not negotiating or appeasing or haggling for a middle ground, but this is actually a true movement towards the centre point where both are in full agreement. This is where they join. Again, repeating, this is the unity that comes from the diversity. Then in that combined unity, they then develop solutions because the foundation for those solutions has come from unity, not desperation, not forced compliance, not brutality or control. But the solutions have come through more than one coming together in truth, which is that higher perspective. So some call it from a religious perspective, two or more come in my name. It's said in that high perspective. That's just from a spiritual point of view, because we are all of that spiritual substance, if you like. Truth is the same thing. When there's a genuine truth there, the possibility of generating real solutions arises as both are joined. From unity, the solutions come because inspiration is accessed by the joining in truth. That's how you find inspiration. You have to have an intention for truth. I call it a portal. It opens. That's why I get a lot of inspiration, because my intention is for truth. This is how you access solutions that heal, solutions that rebalance, solutions that create the mastery. The mastering of the dark and the light within all of us. This is what brings it back to equilibrium. This is the true sustainability, if we really want to know. This is what is called a wise agreement. This is what is called a win-win outcome. Both parties win. So rather than forcing another to give up something in order to gain something, or feeling intimidated and relinquishing something, which makes the experience smaller. The combining in truth, generating the pathways that solve the problems, the wise agreements, produce the win-win, where the pie expands, we grow. The true bounty of human beings was never in money. It was in to know thyself and be true. This is the true wealth of a nation. The monetary, economic perspective on wealth generation is a material one, which is existing within a planet with finite limits. It's a zero-sum game, because as all nations start to wish to live the same lifestyle as those in the first world, you need another 4 planets. That's a lose-lose. That juggernaut many countries have jumped onto in order to stave off poverty, in order to get a seat at the table. The round table is actually, it's like being at a casino where you're accumulating, those chips. You're trying to have a seat at the table and you're trying to gamble. You're taking a gamble because you want to win big. But it's a zero-sum game because the planet has finite limits materially. This is why we're at this tipping point, why we're at this transitional point of great change, because the great change is actually in the way that we see ourselves and our world and who we are as stewards on this planet. Wisdom is not just a nice catchphrase that we throw out in order to appear to be having higher knowledge. It's not about that. In truth, wisdom is the highest. Humility. Some of the really wise ones have talked about it being the lowest place is the highest place. Those with the least have the most because there's more space in which to give. The giving is the true abundance experienced. That's the experiential wealth. When we're constantly setting up situations of taking more and more, we're actually impoverishing ourselves and the planet, and that's why it projects out into the greater world through the depletion of resources. Wisdom is that center point, which everybody has. There is no one who's wiser than anyone else. It's just that most don't have the time or the energy to seek out that center point within themselves. They're too busy in their minds because we're too mind identified. You can only reach it through the heart. There has to be an intention for truth, which is the heart-based intelligence, of which I've talked about. So I'm sitting here in Canberra, which is the confluence of the world's ancient wisdom, held in a center point. All roads lead to the center point. There is great opportunity here in which to inspire those solutions that I've just discussed and to bring our world together to unite, which is what I said in my previous poem, unite the world. And that you are the change. Gandhi often talked about be the change you wish to see. Our actions do matter. Our intentions change the world. They shape change us. So learning to tap into what is true for yourself is what will bring you the greatest joy. It'll bring you back into mastery of the dark and the light element. This is the highest intelligence, is the balance. So with that, I'll send you love and peace and wisdom, and may you find your center point. Thanks again for listening. Take care. Bye.